Hello and welcome to the Aspen Tech Policy Hub's Demo Day for our Policy Impact for Nonprofits cohort. I'm Jessica Cole, and I will be your host for the day alongside the rest of the Hub team. We have a packed hour ahead of us. Today, we're going to share the work of our talented Policy Impact for Nonprofit Fellows. We'll give you a deep dive into some of their policy impact projects and personal journeys. We will announce the winner of our $50,000 Policy Impact Prize and the recipient of our Memorial Sevilla Pitt Fellowship, and we will preview the Hub's upcoming programming. We are also delighted to welcome Kumar Garg, Vice President at Schmidt Futures and a pillar of the science and technology policy space, as our keynote to lead us in conversation about the importance of public interest tech organizations investing in policy impact. A bit of orientation for those of you who are listening in. Throughout this webinar, we will pause for your questions to our presenters. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we will get to as many of them as we can. Before we begin, I want to share why today's demo day is particularly meaningful to the Hub. The Aspen Tech Policy Hub, as a hub, is a West Coast policy incubator. We are dedicated to training a new generation of tech and STEM policy entrepreneurs. We're modeled after Y Combinator, and our mission is to teach STEM, climate, and nonprofit experts the ins and outs of the policy process through programs such as this one. We want to encourage professionals to use their expertise to develop out-of-the-box solutions to society's problems, and we're passionate about doing that by helping connect the people that we train with real decision makers so that they can have outsized impact. Today, we're happy to share that Hub alumni are leading policy change across all levels of government and civil society. Some of them are policy staff at the White House, some are advocates in their local communities, and some are founders, teachers, researchers, and executives. You'll meet a few of them today. Traditionally, the Hub's programming has focused on training individual experts on how to have policy impact. However, with the Nonprofit and Public Interest Fellowship we are showcasing today, we decided to try something a little bit new. We wanted to admit nonprofit and public interest organizations to our cohort so that we could build capacity at an organizational level in addition to the individual level. With that in mind, our inaugural 2023 Nonprofit and Public Interest Fellowship provided leaders representing 15 different organizations with 3 intensive weeks of policy skills building and 3 additional months of policy project support that they could bring back to their organizations. We are excited to share the results of that capacity building work with you today. And also at the end of today's webinar, we will preview recruitments for our 2 upcoming Hub programs, so stay tuned. With that, I'm delighted to introduce the first presenting fellow of today's demo day. Saira Congallo, MPH, will be presenting on FDA Breakthrough Device Designation for third-party interoperability. Saira, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jess. I'm gonna go ahead and share screen. So the organization I represented for this fellowship is Tidepool. Tidepool was founded over 10 years ago as an open source 501c3 nonprofit by people with diabetes, caregivers, and leading healthcare providers committed to helping all people with diabetes safely achieve good health outcomes through more accessible, actionable, and meaningful diabetes data, mainly through our software solutions and our programs. We choose to operate as a nonprofit so that we can put the diabetes community first and so that we can empower the next generation of innovation in diabetes management. Our proposal for this project was for the FDA to incentivize interoperability in diabetes devices in order to provide the best care to people with diabetes. And we suggest that one way to do this is by updating one of the FDA's guidance documents to provide more explicit examples of what qualifies for a breakthrough device designation. If all of that sounded really confusing, don't worry, I'm going to explain a little bit about what all of that means. But before I get into that, a little bit of background about me. This work is really personal. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 8 years old. My husband's pickup line was literally a nice insulin pump. And both of our young daughters were diagnosed over the course of the last 7 years, and they're only 6 and 8 years old. So with 100% of our family relying on insulin and diabetes devices to literally keep us alive, picking and choosing the diabetes devices that keep us healthy, improve our quality of life, and honestly reduce the burden of this disease is really key. All 4 of us could sit down to the exact same meal. but we would need different tools to manage, especially when considering variables across, is my daughter going through a growth spurt? Am I going through hormonal, monthly hormonal fluctuations? How much stress are we going through? And so imagine if that is true of a household with the exact same diet and health insurance, imagine the variations in what people with diabetes across the country might need. So a little more background for those of you who don't have a house made up of insulin and juice boxes. Automated insulin dosing is a term for a system that takes some of that decision burden of diabetes management away from patients by connecting three key components. A continuous glucose monitor, or a CGM, is a replacement for finger pokes, essentially, that provides glucose readings every 5 minutes. And then there's the controller or algorithm, and an insulin pump. The controller essentially calculates how to automatically adjust insulin delivery in an effort to reduce high and low blood sugars. And it does that by sending commands to the insulin pump to adjust how much insulin delivery is going through. So leading off what I talked about a little bit ago about the variations in diabetes management, this slide shares a little bit of what the existing frameworks in the diabetes industry look like. Since my own diagnosis, where I had to pretty much eat the exact same thing at the same time every day, the advances in insulin pumps and CGMs and algorithms connected to have been pretty tremendous. They've been amazing. But at the same time, if I want my daughter to use the insulin pump with the adhesive that doesn't irritate her sensitive skin that much, or in conjunction with the algorithm that actually works best for her, and if she wants to use the infusion set that's pink because she's a 6-year-old, too bad. Those companies don't all work together. Or if my other daughter decides she wants to use a patch pump because she's in per core classes and tubing just doesn't work for her, again, with the algorithm that makes the best sense for her, too bad. We aren't in a system where just a patient and a doctor get to work and look through all the systems that the FDA has cleared to decide what makes the most sense for their individual needs. And so this current status quo is essentially what prompted me to explore how we might advocate for policy change to help encourage interoperability and patient choice within the diabetes ecosystem. And so as part of that, I built out this ideal roadmap to kind of get us to a plug and play ecosystem where patients and providers are the ones that get to decide what makes sense for them. And full disclosure, battling health insurance or prior authorizations or any of that is not something that we tried to tackle for this project, seeing as there was, a timeline that we needed to work within. But we are fully aware that there's a lot that still needs to be done to advance the state of healthcare in the United States. But for this policy project, I chose to focus on the first two steps that we kind of built out in this roadmap. And so that need for interoperability in the diabetes space, being something that could really use a broader understanding and advocacy for, is why for part of this policy project, I wrote an op-ed dedicated to kind of explaining the need to a wider audience. And that's something we're working on getting published. And beyond this project, we've also done a lot of work to incorporate the interoperability messaging and to highlight the benefits in this new era of diabetes device innovation, honestly. And then for the second part of the roadmap, I drafted an update to the FDA's breakthrough device designation to specifically include an automated insulin dosing system that allows for third-party interoperability, enabling patient and provider choice to pick the components that significantly ease the burden of diabetes management and provide care that caters to individual patient needs, as a very explicit example of something that qualifies for this designation. So the breakthrough device designation is a program run by the FDA designed to accelerate the development and approval of innovative medical devices that have the potential to improve patient care and address unmet medical needs. And the benefits for devices that receive this designation include an expedited regulatory process, an opportunity to work really closely with the FDA, and early market access as a few examples. But most importantly, it allows for innovation to reach patients and providers quickly. And so in recognition of all of these benefits of interoperability and advancing healthcare technology and patient care, the FDA should consider third-party interoperability as a qualifier to grant that breakthrough device designation to eligible medical devices. Receiving this designation is a transformative milestone for a diabetes device manufacturer, and an additional benefit to consider is how it signifies recognition by the FDA that this device has the potential to really revolutionize diabetes management, which in turn encourages innovation. And I also want to just touch on the potential for this language to stretch beyond the diabetes device industry, because we're hopeful that this could also foster innovation and patient choice for just the larger medical community as well. And so in a little bit of just a conclusion, at Tidepool, we've been really early adopters of the concept of interoperability and of patients needing to have agency over their devices and their data ever since our founding. And interoperability is at the core of both of our big software solutions. But we realize there's really only so much we can do by us choosing to do things differently. And so this entire project has really helped us kind of look for opportunities for policy change where we can make a bigger impact on the larger industry as a whole. So, now that the fellowship is over, we know there's a lot more on the roadmap that we built out and just a lot more left to be done. And yeah, that's about it. Back to you, Jess.
Saira, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your project. The questions have been flooding in, so we're going to take a few minutes here to ask you some questions about the project. So one question that came in was around why the FDA hasn't prioritized interoperability so far in medtech devices. So why do you think it might be that this change that feels to you so obvious and so useful has not yet been a part of the guidance?
So I don't know if I would, one, I can't speak on behalf of the FDA. I, do not work there, do not represent them in any way, shape, or form. So I'll give that caveat. But I also don't know if it's fair to say that the FDA has not prioritized it. I think just the very specific example that I'm giving, I honestly think it's just not something that has been considered in the past. And that I think is a unique aspect of just having gone through the fellowship, kind of being able to see these opportunities for leveraging change, essentially. But I would actually say the opposite. In our interactions, I think that this is definitely something that the FDA has, in different ways and shapes and forms, created different pathways for to encourage. And so I don't know that I would say that it is something that they don't prioritize. It's more of us kind of being able to give them another way in which to leverage the power that they do have.
But that's interesting. So one of the things that you're talking about here is the FDA is stakeholder, and you referenced in your presentation that there are many stakeholders who you would want to see the behavior change. So the FDA might unlock some things, but then it's still going to take manufacturers or device makers. Could you share a little bit about how you worked with or thought about the device makers and software developers and others as you kind of figured out what the policy input for this change could look like?
Yeah, one of the steps through this fellowship was kind of, that entire stakeholder mapping. And so I didn't put that up on the screen, but we went through a very extensive process of really thinking through all the players that it takes to kind of enact any kind of change. It's with something as big as the diabetes industry, there's so many people to consider, whether it's providers or the device manufacturers, the regulatory folks, the actual end users. There's a lot of different perspectives to consider, and thinking through how it might impact everyone is kind of what got us to this part about how do we make this something that we already know all of these stakeholders are fully on board with it, but here's kind of the barriers to adoption for manufacturers, and kind of allowing looking for room for change, and how can we make it so that all the stakeholders are considered, and how do we make it something that is something that everybody wants, is essentially kind of where we got to. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think you did touch on it. And I think we had a second question that was around manufacturers as well, which is how much weight do you expect a change like the one that you're proposing would carry with the manufacturers? How would it change their behavior?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Also, one I can't necessarily speak on behalf of the manufacturer. I've never sat in those shoes, but the intention behind this is not to force their hand, but to encourage it, because I genuinely believe that if it is something that makes sense for a device manufacturer, that's where change will happen. And so really thinking through, I think there's additional work to be done. I don't think this is an end all, and that by this, device designation criteria being updated, that automatically the entire industry is going to look really different. I think there's a lot, kind of what I touched on the roadmap, taking a lot more to really get to that point. And we fully intend on kind of seeing through what else we can do to help shift things along. But this is not the end.
Well, on that note, what a perfect note to transition. You have some more questions in the chat that you're welcome to respond to there, but thank you so much and congratulations on the launch of your policy project today. We will be posting the links to this policy project in chat so that you can follow along with them after this demo day. Thank you, Saira. Next up, I would like to welcome our next fellow, Nidhi Rastogi from RIT, who will be presenting the Policy Impact Project Trust Verify Dealing with Social Media Deception. Nidhi, over to you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Nidhi Rastogi. I'm an assistant professor at Rochester Institute of Technology, and I'm also the Aspen Fellow at the Tech Policy Hub 2023. For the Tech Policy Impact Project, I'm presenting Addressing Radical Content on Social Media. So in higher education, such as the ones that I represent, such as RIT, our student community is facing a massive challenge from the exposure to radical content through social media platforms such as TikTok, Instagram, etc. And the objective of the policy work that I did at Aspen was to empower impacted students so that they can recognize, respond to, and counter the impact of such content. With this objective in mind and its implications, I'm proposing a 1-hour workshop, a very simple solution, easy to take on. So what I'm going to do is, for the rest of the presentation, is to provide some background on this topic, the implications of radical content, and why university heads need to act on it now. So this will be followed by ways in which the proposed workshop is the right strategic intervention to educate and empower the student population. Social media platforms, how does this radical content even reach our students? They're often recommended by the algorithm driven by the content creators, which is further exasperated when friends, peers, and connections share the previously recommended content. Even the profit-seeking industry, as we all know, they push campaigns to target impressionable audiences with radical ideologies or even misinformation. We've seen that, I've gone through several studies, especially the ones by Pew Research Center, and what they've reported is that 72% of teens are exposed to misleading, violent political content on social media. And what this exposure does to them is that it kind of correlates with the increased risk behavior among college students, which kind of includes glorification of violence, promoting extreme beliefs, or negatively impacting, which negatively affects their academic performance. Beyond misinformation, social media platforms also host content which promotes harmful behaviors such as substance abuse, which in turn impacts student health and campus safety. And for us academics, we have to prioritize interventions because we want to mitigate the adverse effects for student safety, well-being, and responsible adult development. So what this leads to is the student become increasingly extreme in their beliefs and ideologies, which is not good for the overall society and the growth of any nation. And if these are not acknowledged, the student may resort to social isolation, and they don't end up communicating with anyone, and anxiety and depression. So as of today, unfortunately, many universities currently lack institutionalized training for students on social media literacy. And therefore, my recommendation is to adopt a short workshop, and I'll give you the reasons behind it, why a short workshop is effective soon. This workshop will give students access to immediate information and the essential skills required to navigate the social media landscape safely and critically. The goal of the workshop will be to equip students with the right tools and skills, which will enable them to mitigate dangers of radicalization, misinformation, something that we see pretty much every day in the news. Even many of us have experienced it in some form or factor. And examples of what we'll be training these students will include workshops. In this workshop will be how to discern reliable source from untrustworthy ones. This will be the key component. And how to recognize markers of misleading or sensationalized information, especially on the AI or LLM-driven chatbots, chat assistants like ChatGPT and Bard. So what we want is that the students to be able to engage in group discussions and role play to foster collective sense of responsibility and agency. Why now? Because radical content is at an all-time high. And like I mentioned in one of the previous slides, the college population, the age group over there is the main target group by many of these platforms. So universities such as the ones that I'm working in RIT can offer a short introductory skill building workshop for a quick and effective training to help with skill building immediately. We know that attention is precious and short. So these workshops can be up and running in a very quick time, the turnaround time is rather short. Resources required will be minimal, and we can also attach them with several ongoing campaigns in universities on mental health. A lot of these universities also have technical expertise on mental health, and these are available for many higher education campuses. And student clubs have proven to be our allies. So finally, to summarize, university support will impact thousands, if not more, students, through a workshop like the one that I proposed. And in fact, for larger community impact, such a workshop can be attached with ongoing mental health campaigns that many universities run. And at the end of it, the policy will help students learn to navigate online platforms, safely discern truth from lies, and empower others on how to deal with social media deception together. So for more information, you can refer to the detailed workshop resources that are provided on the Aspen Tech Policy Hub website. And thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions now.
Congratulations, Nidhi. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. We have had some questions rolling in from the audience, so I am going to start there, and I encourage everyone else, this is your moment if you want to add anything else. So Nidhi, the one question is, you talked about obviously RIT specifically, but also some broader opportunities. Do you know of any universities who are tackling radicalization through social media through other means, kind of not the workshop approach, but other possible approaches?
Currently, a lot of the efforts are going into research and presenting results of research, and that research kind of includes how the content which is shared on these platforms like Reddit, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, how is it impacting student population? Specifically, I'm going to talk about student population in higher education. But unfortunately, it has been limited to research and propagating that research through conferences and white papers and technical papers. It hasn't reached a wider population who doesn't read that. Many of the undergraduate students and community colleges, for example, colleges which impart only 2-year practical certifications and all that, this kind of information does not reach them. So I wouldn't be able to give specific names, but I'm sure at RIT we are making those efforts. Our neighbor University of Rochester is also making certain attempts, but like I mentioned in my talk, there is no institutionalized effort as yet.
Mm-hmm. Right. So there's a difference between what the researchers are focused on and what is actually actively providing practical guidance and tools to the students who are on the campus.
Absolutely.
Relatedly, one of the questions is actually around your pitching of this project. How has RIT responded to this proposal so far? Do they seem receptive? What are you noticing as you're actually having these discussions with university administrators?
So I do have to say this isn't part of the research that I am actively engaged in. However, and I was a little unsure how my, the dean of the college and my department chair and the executive director of the institute that I'm representing, Global Cybersecurity Institute, how would they react to it? I was extremely surprised, pleasantly surprised how happy they were that somebody came up with this idea, and I think that kind of also gave them confidence that having me to spend almost a summer at the Aspen Tech Policy Hub was such a fruitful collaboration. So yes, it was received very, very positively, and the the workshop that I'm proposing is it will be integrated with the orientation that we have every fall. So in 2024, it will be part of the orientation.
Well, congratulations then doubly on the launch of this policy project. And again, we will include the links in the chat for you to follow along, and the launch, it sounds like, of the actual workshop you've been aiming for as part of that onboarding and orientation in the new year. So thank you so much, Nidhi, for joining us. You have many more questions that are flowing into the chat that we will let you answer from your seat there. But with that, I would like to transition us for our keynote speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kumar, welcome.
Hey there.
Hello. Allow me please to do a drum roll before we dive into our keynote moment here. So for those of you who don't know him, and I imagine many of you may have encountered him, Kumar is the Vice President of Partnerships at Schmidt Futures. He has previously helped to shape science and technology policy federally for the Obama administration for nearly 8 years, serving in a variety of roles in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, what you may know as OSTP. So while at OSTP, Kumar touched on any number of pieces of policy development and implementation, communication, convening, and so on, including leading the Obama administration's efforts to bolster science, technology, engineering, and math education, including the Educate to Innovate campaign, where there was more than $1 billion in in-kind and philanthropic investment, development of major State of the Union initiatives, which is timely for this time of year, to train 100,000 excellent STEM teachers and bring computer science to all K-12 students, and the creation of iconic events that you may have heard of, such as the White House Science Fair. So you all can understand why he is an ideal person for us to bring up for a fireside chat to talk about the importance of public interest organizations doing policy work. And I'm also delighted because he is a wonderful bridge across many of the different areas, the kind of for-profit, philanthropic, and governmental sides that we often bring together at demo days like this. So welcome, Kumar. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And huge kudos to the to the hub for I continue to find people all over DC that are like, oh, this was my entry point into getting involved in policymaking. And so I'm excited to be part of this conversation.
Well, that actually brings us to part of the question for you, which is briefly, could you share your kind of relationship to the world of nonprofits and the world of policymaking on your side?
Yeah, sure. So my background is definitely on the policy side. So I came to, after graduate school, I came to DC on a policy fellowship. So I got this thing that was called the Heyman Fellowship. It allowed me a year of basically subsidized support to come to DC. And I ended up in the White House Office of Science and Tech Policy in 2009, just as President Obama was coming in. And then proceeded, it's one of those things where you don't actually know what job you're getting when you get into one of these things. Ended up working a lot, as you said, on STEM education. The president had just given a big speech on putting science in its rightful place. That speech ended up being a lot about education. President Obama cared a lot about how do we be investing in the building blocks on the education side for our innovation economy, but there was actually nobody working on it. So I ended up becoming at least a third of my time throughout my 8 years was on STEM education, and then I ended up staying. I did that first year fellowship and then stayed, and then went from like newbie to kind of graybeard in White House terms, because most people do 2 years and I did all 8. And so by the end, definitely had more institutional memory than most people there. And then I have been working with Eric Schmidt since on a science and tech philanthropy that still takes a lot, focuses on broadly similar themes, which is how do we take emerging ideas out of the science and tech sector and think about how can they help us solve big, important public problems. But I would say that the reason I think the core of what the hub works on, and specifically this focus on nonprofits, is so important is that the kind of way you experience policy, if you like kind of watch policy by like watching the news, or is that it's kind of a debate about priorities, right? So people are like, oh, they going to focus on Ukraine, or are they going to focus on the war in the Middle East, or maybe there's a border crisis? So it's like the handful of issues that rise to being like the big things that everyone is fighting over. But when you're actually like in the policy roles inside the government, when you're sort of in the bureaucracy, for most of the people who are working on it, the big issues are not what they work on. Like they're working on working with the General Services Administration on buying more EVs to jumpstart the EV market, or how do we make sure the hydrogen hub program goes off, or how do we electrify airports, or all these different things. And so the key thing to always remember is that, if you've just watched the news, you would think that your job is to make your issue more salient.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, like, that's not your job, because like you're never going to be the most burning thing on the president's calendar. Your job is to find the people inside the government who actually care about that topic. And there's actually often, and to give them actionable ideas that they actually have some control over. And so my experience was that some nonprofits would come meet with me and they would say, you know what, I really want you to take the thing I work on really seriously. And it would be like, I'd be like, that's why I'm having this coffee. Like I care about this. The question is like, what do you want me to do? And then they would say, well, I don't know. I mean, you're the policy person. And then that was like the missed opportunity. And so I think the reason why something like the hub is so important is in that moment, the person wants something actionable they have control over. What can I do? And so if you can actually give them an actionable idea, like, hey, you actually have this legal authority. So I'll give an example. So there was a guy who had formerly worked at the FCC, who was now working at a nonprofit, who called me up and he said, and I was quizzing him on, what are ideas for things we could do. We had lost the Congress, so there was no way that we were going to get big new legislation done. And he said, oh, well, one idea that I think somebody should be doing is someone should be lifting the cap that exists in the Universal Service Fund, which is what the FCC raises money to then fund more schools and others. Someone should be raising that. I was like, that's interesting. Like, who does Congress have to pass a law to raise the universal service fee? And he's like, no, the agency can just do it. They can say, we actually think there's more broadband gaps. We're going to raise the fee and therefore generate billions more dollars. I was like, this can't be true, right? Like, you're telling me the agency can wake up one day and say that actually make a determination, all this. He's like, totally. So then I went and talked to the agency, and lo and behold, it's true. The agency actually has within its authority to do that. I mean, there were a bunch of like political steps that had to happen around making sure Congress was not going to get surprised and make sure advocates were fine because, you are raising a fee. But 4 months later, President Obama launches the Connect Ed initiative. It, over the next 3 years, cost $10 billion more to flow towards the digital divide, specifically focused on schools, which ended up being very important going into the pandemic. And it's like an example of an idea that a nonprofit that leader said, this is within your authority.
Yep.
You can do a lot of good, and somebody should look into it.
Well, and the fact that they showed up to you and said, I've done the research. I know the tools. I understand the policy implications. Like, I'm trying to give you exactly what you need, allowed them to unlock that moment for you, it sounds like.
Exactly.
And for you, I know we could spend all day, so I'm trying to pick one more question that we can tackle together. But I guess for you, as part of this initiative, we ran into so many nonprofits who wanted to build out this muscle, who said, okay, I've been doing direct work for years, and now I want to go upstream and help with policy, but I don't even know how to make the case to funders, and kind of funders who kind of said, we don't tend to do grants or to invest or to think about, how to provide policy muscle for our individual grantees. How might folks who, as either funders or as nonprofits, help to make that case or help to kind of translate why this matters? So that
I think the key story to tell your funders is the word leverage, which is funders are obsessed with leverage. They know that anytime they're operating in any system, they are small compared to the total amount of money, compared to the total size of the space. And so their boards are always asking them, well, you got this $10 million program. how is it gonna like impact the student loan system, right? And so what you say to them is, this is how you're gonna answer your leverage question, which is, you're not just funding us to do direct service. You're actually building a model that if we can communicate to policymakers, that model can replicate in all these contexts that are not a direct service model. So this gives you this like huge leverage payoff that you don't get through your direct service. And often the key thing is to not make it sound like a big policy campaign. Then it suddenly feels like, oh, like, I don't know, like it's an election year, is anything gonna happen? It's like instead framing it as, there is a well-meaning bureaucrat that if we gave this idea to them with the right wrapping of this is something you can do, they will do it. Right? And then suddenly people are like, oh yeah, like, there's governors that are looking for ideas, there's, and having some of those examples in mind, so leverage and targeted.
Thank you so much. I cannot think of anyone who would be more equipped to talk about that kind of inside-outside way of framing and of getting leverage. This is the time that we have for Keynote today. It is a delight to have you. Thank you so much, Kumar. And with that, actually, we're going to follow this with a panel who is going to, of fellows who will talk about their own journeys with their organizations to moving towards having policy impact as organizations. So I'm excited with that to hand over the mic to my colleague Kateri, who will lead that panel of nonprofit leaders to talk about that policy impact that they've achieved in their roles and the impact of the nonprofit cohort on their own organizational and personal policy trajectories. Before I do, just a quick reminder, after this panel, we will announce the winner of our inaugural $50,000 challenge prize, as well as our Sapphilip Pitt Fellow of the cohort. Finally, we noted before, these projects are being released live, and these case studies are being released live. So check the chat for all of the links so that you can follow that in real time, and feel free to submit your Q&A for the panelists as we go. Thank you so much. Kateri, over to you, and thank you again, Kumar.
Thank you again, Kumar. It was so illuminating to hear about the behind the scenes with funders. It's always an interesting peek behind the veil. And hi to all of you. It's great to see so many of you here this afternoon. I am Kateri Gadjadar-Smith, the program specialist here at the Hub. We've already heard from a few of our fellows on their Hub mentored projects, and now I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into the fellowship itself and how the Hub has impacted two organizations' policy strategies. Please welcome Corrine Stewart, the Director of Programming at G-Code, and Josh Richards, the North American Vice President of Pacific Peering. So Josh and Corrine, welcome. I'm so glad you guys could make it. Can I ask you each to briefly introduce yourselves and say a bit about your organization and your roles?
I'm Josh with Pacific Peering. I'm a lawyer with background in emerging tech, and I work for an environmental tech company focused on ocean health. We're headquartered in Paris, doing work in the Pacific Islands, and I'm located in Washington, D.C., working on regulatory and funding efforts.
Hello, everyone. I'm Corrine Stewart. I am the Director of Programming at G-Code. We're an organization dedicated to empowering Black, Brown, and Indigenous young women and non-binary people of color through introductory tech programs. Our aim is to open doors to economic access, economic opportunities in the tech industry. In my role, I focus on creating and managing these programs, not only providing these foundational technical skills, but also supporting our fellows in their journeys up to early career.
That's amazing. Can I ask you guys what made you apply for the fellowship? Like, why did you think policy training specifically would make your existing work more impactful?
Sure. So a little bit about the company and how it relates to policy. So Pacific Peering is deploying the world's first environmental sensors connected to underwater data cables. It's the same cables that connect the internet around the world. And the sensors that we're adding to them are going to help us measure things like temperature and climate change, current sea level rise, and give advance warning on tsunamis. And we were interested in the fellowship because this technology has massive policy implications. And we were looking to establish a U.S. policy arm to understand how to engage policymakers as this technology develops. And the Hub was a natural choice for us because of its combination of policy expertise, technology focus, and their extensive work with public benefit companies working in fields like environmental protection.
Yes, and here at G Code, we applied for the fellowship because we wanted to explore how policy can further support our mission and enhance our impact on the communities that we serve. Of course, communities are made up of people, and they're impacted every day by policy. Sometimes they just don't know how. And we want to delve into that a little bit more to see what kind of change we can make.
I love that. It's the little changes every day, right? That's what we always say. Can you elaborate a little bit more on specific policy issues that are particularly important to your work and how you are already using or planning to use the tools from this fellowship to address that issue?
We're especially interested in the work of the OSTP and their Ocean Climate Action Plan. It's America's first strategic plan to address ocean health. With the help from the Hub Fellowship, we drafted an answer to a request for information by OSTP on ocean health. And the training from the Hub really helped us understand how to present our information in a way that would be helpful to policymakers. And we employed a number of specific lessons from that fellowship. And the feedback from the Hub leadership was just so helpful in our writing.
So inclusivity in tech education, workforce development training is paramount. We plan on using the fellowship tools to advocate for policies that provide equitable access to tech education and job opportunities, especially for marginalized groups in the tech industry. Our work is directly impacted by the policy changes that happen in workforce development and education within STEM education.
How do you expect your organization's approach to change in those ways moving forward because of your time here at the Hub and your decision to focus specifically on policymaking in those areas?
Well, our entire policymaking arm was built based on the guidance that we received from the Hub. And the timing worked out perfectly for us as we were looking to build a policy arm just as the Hub opened up their nonprofit program. It provided us with the tools and conceptual framework that we needed to establish an effective policymaking arm, along with models for structuring our team and training our staff. And understanding the legal limits between advocacy and lobbying was particularly helpful, something that we learned during the fellowship.
That's a hard one.
Yeah, so for us, the fellowship underscored the importance of integrating our policy understanding into our work, highlighting how we can contribute to a broader scheme of change. I know that sometimes challenges by nonprofits are that things can seem daunting. You're trying to tackle these big issues. One of the biggest takeaways was, the power of policy and how you can drive systemic change by collaborating with like-minded individuals and organizations, so that you can collectively take up these issues and, be the change that you want to see. For us, I mean, what better climate than now when everyone's talking about STEM and generative AI? We want to be in on those conversations because the community that we serve are directly impacted by the acceleration of technology and the demands that flow from that, the demands of work opportunities that flow from that.
Absolutely. Do either of you have any advice for nonprofits or even for people who want to get involved in policy and impacting policy but aren't quite sure where to start? Like, how did you guys do it to participate in this fellowship?
I would definitely look at the resources that the Hub offers. There's a lot of materials and guidance that you can find on the Hub website.
That's the right answer.
I would absolutely consider applying for one of the fellowships offered by the Hub. I mean, it is a very big time commitment, but the return on investment really was incredible for us.
Yes, I would second that, Josh. But for those who are not able to make it into the cohort, I would say start by gaining understanding of the policies that directly affect your mission. Invest time in exploring how these policies intersect. Actively engage with those who are already doing the work. Schedule discussions for to learn from the experiences and all the nuances of their work. Start building connections with your local and state politicians, those who are in the driving seat for policy, those who are connected and are doing the work in your similar arenas. And then finally, use your organization's data and stories to illustrate real world impact on policies. I think sometimes that's what we're missing as nonprofits, that we need to use our own stories, our own words to demonstrate how people are affected by the policies that are passed.
Great. I'd like to ask an audience question, and as a reminder, you can drop any questions or compliments you have for our fellows' work into the Q&A box, which is right there. So this is for both of you. Do you have any advice for convincing your nonprofit leadership to get engaged in policy? Did you have any challenges there? How did you guys do it?
So on my end, that was my specific mandate, and I'm in leadership, so I didn't really have that dynamic. Corinne, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I think it's all about just having a conversation about the importance of policy advocacy and how that affects your organization. Sometimes it's not plain for people to see that. So perhaps you may connect the dots for them before prepare that before the conversation and just demonstrate that, through just telling a story about how maybe it's impacted you personally. I think that stories, the human impact is what they need to see to make that decision.
I think you're right. And at the leadership level, a lot of decisions are made based on return on investment. So underscoring how that is going to impact the bottom line and the overall missions of the organization.
Yes.
It's all business, isn't it? Okay, we have time for one more question. So I want to ask maybe a fun one. So I think that sometimes it can be kind of difficult for folks to imagine what one of these fellowships look like in reality. So for those of us in the audience who don't maybe know as much about the fellowship, could you tell us a little bit about what the experience was like? So what you did on a day-to-day basis or one of your favorite moments, and then the rest we can answer, we'll type them out for you guys.
I think the fellowship was kind of like being back in school, but an intensely condensed version. It required a lot of work, both in class and outside of class, from readings to writing assignments and working dinners. There was a lot of networking with featured speakers. But really, I think the intense nature of the fellowship allowed us to build some really lasting friendships, as well as professional relationships with the other fellows.
Yes, and I liken it to a community where you're sharing experiences and knowledge, but these are tried and true methods of policy advocacy. We were networking with policy and tech leaders. We were given guidance and support in our hands-on projects. The demonstration of how this work is done was particularly forefront, which I really love that because sometimes people are talking like philosophically, and I love the practicality of things. And so being able to get this working in the trenches type of environment was really great because I can also, take back that knowledge to my own organization and set up a policy shop and implement all the things that I learned from the fellowship. So from day to day, it was a different experience every day, which I also appreciated that. But yeah, you definitely have to put the work in. There was a lot of long hours during those 3 weeks. So
I agree. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And if you have any other further questions for Josh and Kareen, you can feel free to drop them in the chat, but I will hand it back to Jessica Cole.
Thank you, Kateri. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Kareen. What a fantastic panel and set of advice that I wish I had had when I was starting in nonprofit leadership around flexing your policy muscle. Next up, we are going to move to presenting the challenge prize for $50,000. And to do that, I'd like to introduce Sarah Collins, the Director of Government Affairs at Public Knowledge and one of our challenge prize judges. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Jessica. As a Challenge Prize judge, I and two of my colleagues, Ayushi Roy of New America and Constanza Frischen of Aspen Digital, reviewed 6 fantastic projects from this cohort of nonprofit fellows. For these projects, each nonprofit organization was trying to put their newfound muscles to use to impact policy in their area of expertise. You've heard about 2 of the projects here today already, on combating mis and disinformation in college settings and on improving the interoperability of medtech devices. Some of the other projects that were not presented here today included streamlining grant applications at the federal level and building policy arms at environmental and educational impact organizations. As a judge, I was impressed with the depth of knowledge that these fellows demonstrated in their chosen areas, as well as the creativity of these projects to make meaningful changes to better the world. We had the challenging task of picking just one project to award the $50,000 challenge grant to. We are delighted to announce that the recipient of the challenge grant for the 2023 nonprofit cohort is Saira Kangalo and Tidepool, one of the orgs you heard from today. Their project focused on pushing the FDA to improve the interoperability of diabetes devices to allow for more choices and better outcomes for diabetes patients. Like all of the fellows, Saira's expertise, creativity, and passion shone through her work. What made it especially outstanding was how she communicated the value of her proposal, whether it was to a regulatory agency like the FDA, patients who are experiencing diabetes, or to a judge who has no specialized knowledge about medical devices. Her persuasive arguments combined with a clear implementation strategy made her the obvious winner of the challenge grant today. Congratulations to Saira and Tidepool for their wonderful work. I'm excited to see what they are able to accomplish with the $50,000 challenge prize. With that, I will turn it back to Jessica Cole.
Thank you so much. And you will see that also up on our screen, we have Howard Look, the CEO of Tidepool. Congratulations, Howard. Howard is the founder and CEO of Tidepool, which Saira came to the hub to represent, which is a recognized innovator in diabetes software that is on a mission to make diabetes data more accessible, actionable, and meaningful for people with diabetes, their care teams, and researchers. Tidepool was founded in 2013, and they host a suite of software solutions for people with diabetes and their care teams. Tidepool is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization, and as you heard, the recipient of this year's challenge prize. So with that, Howard, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jess. And first of all, Saira, congratulations. You have taken what you've learned through the Aspen Tech Policy Hub and the Aspen Institute and just carried the torch of technology and policy and equity and access and impact so much further than I ever imagined possible. So congratulations on receiving this award. It is well deserved. And we are just so grateful to the Aspen Tech Policy Hub for making this grant available. When Tidepool was founded in 2013, we took it upon ourselves to do our work as a technology software organization, but as a not-for-profit with the goal of having the greatest possible impact that we could with our technology. We actually were recipients of the Office of Science and Technology Policy Champion of Change Award in 2015, and that was really just scratching the surface. So Kumar, thank you for your efforts in the Obama administration to help make that possible. And thank you again to Saira and the Aspen Tech Policy Hub. There's so much more that can be done to help make sure that people in the diabetes community get access to this great technology and help improve outcomes. So thank you all. Back to you, Jess.
Thanks. And Kumar, I saw you hop on. Do you have any quick comments for the Tidepool team? I didn't know about that connection.
No, just huge congrats. I think it's like the more complex it is, the bigger impact you can have. So I appreciate the nerdy goodness.
We love nerdy goodness. Thank you.
Thank you both and congrats again. So as our kind of final two steps for today's demo day, we are going to have Kateri come back to present the Sevilla Pitt Memorial Fellow with that fellowship and share more information about Sevilla. And then I will come to wrap up about hub programming in the coming months. Kateri.
Thank you, Jess. And let me also give a shout out is that the nerdier, the better. So I like it. So Sevilla Pitt, who you can see on the screen, was the hub's first employee. Although she spent only 10% of her time with the hub, she reviewed and helped select every single fellow for our early classes. She was also an integral part of Aspen Digital. She managed all of our cybersecurity events and programming. She was such a delightful and caring person and personally reached out to support nearly every single person on the team, just always trying to do whatever she could for people. She never wanted credit, just to help. She was passionate about being in Washington, D.C., and it had been a dream of hers for many years before joining the Aspen Institute. Sadly, Sevilla started experiencing some health symptoms in December 2020 and passed away very suddenly of pancreatic cancer in January 2021. In her honor, the Hub identifies a member of each fellowship cohort that exemplifies her selflessness, kindness, and desire to impact Washington, D.C. policy. So this year, we are excited to announce that our 2023 Sevilla Pitt Fellow is Nancy Valentine. Nancy, as her cohort members said, exemplifies Sevilla's ethos through her actions. She cared about every cohort member and staff member. As one of her classmates wrote, she was always quick to check in with folks individually to see how they're doing or to see if they needed anything, and she is extremely thoughtful of others. Nancy embodies Sevilla's selflessness and generosity of spirit. She pays keen attention to what makes a person special, takes an interest in that person's passions and key characteristic traits. Our fellows classmates also mentioned Nancy's extreme thoughtfulness and how she'd be the first person to advocate on others' behalf and always takes others into account. She pays keen attention to what makes people special and loves to hype you up for it. In addition to being a very special person, our 2023 Sevilla Pitt Fellow is a true collaborative leader. She is deeply committed to making a difference in Washington, D.C., and her classmates referred to her as being a lifer. And to this day, I still write all my notes in this cute little notebook that she got me. So thank you, Nancy, and congratulations. And with that, I will pass it back to Jessica Cole. And if you see Nancy in the audience, say hi and give her a shout out.
Continuing the shout outs, just a huge congratulations to Syra and Tidepool, Nancy and Northwest Center on their recognition. Congratulations to all of the fellows who presented here today on the panel and all of the fellows who participated and the organizations who participated in this cohort of the fellowship. As you can see from just this little slice that you've seen today, this is a tremendously special, smart, dedicated group of organizations and individuals who are really working to impact policy using the new tools that they have at their fingertips. And we cannot wait to watch them go on and do just that from their respective seats. That said, I also want to thank our prize presenters and our reviewers. And I, in particular, want to thank Kumar for your insights and work in the field. As you could tell from that last jump in, you have been able to inflect not just the people immediately in front of you, but people for years, and it's a privilege to have you here. All of that being said, we are now looking to the future, and we are excited to preview that we will be launching our first two recruitments of the year for the Tech Policy Hub in early February. The first, an individualized fellowship for climate and technology leaders, and the second, a short course format policy writing bootcamp. So if you or someone you know is interested in applying for those or other future hub programming, sign up for our mailing list or subscribe to our social media channels, and that is where we will release the recruitments as they become available. We so greatly appreciated having you join us here today, and we look forward to seeing you at future hub events. Thanks again, congratulations to all of you, and have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. That concludes our demo day presentation.